Hi everyone, welcome back. We're continuing today with our series on the basics of garden design, and today we're going back to the drawing board with the outline master plan, or sometimes called the presentation plan. So we've been instructed to design our client's garden. We've been round, we've come up with a client brief which they've signed off on. We've done a site survey, done a site analysis, and then we've come up with a concept which we think was going to work best for the site and for their brief. So now we need to refine that design, take on board any feedback that the client has given us, any changes that they might want to make or that we've noticed that we think would work well with the design. We've then got to ensure that it's practical, it's buildable and it's efficient. So this is the concept that I did for a garden a few years back. The main feedback I got on this concept was that they generally liked the overall design, felt like it captured everything within the brief. However, they still felt there was too much in the way of brick walling. Obviously we're working with the neighbouring garages facing into the garden. They also decided they wanted to add a built-in seat under the pergola to maximise space. As we talked about, this only just being big enough for a table and maybe 4 to 6 chairs. And then they asked if I could make the pergola a little bit more interesting. I think the client had been looking through Pinterest, had found some pergola designs they really liked, and had asked if we could perhaps incorporate some of this style into the design. So I'd see that as generally fairly good feedback overall. They liked the design, they thought it worked with the garden. I agree, there is quite a lot of brickwork on show, and I'm sure we can do something to tweak that and improve that style of the design. I think the idea of a seat underneath the pergola, a built-in seat, is a great idea, as it will save space and certainly look good when they're not using the garden. And I think overall, I think the idea of changing the pergola that's their choice. You know, I'm not someone that likes to take other people's designs and replicate them. So although they've sent me some images of what they like on Pinterest, I'm going to take that as inspiration as to the style they want, and I'm going to come up with an alternative pergola that hopefully meets their requirements. Now at this stage, before we went any further, I just thought it would probably be worth dropping the client a bit of an email, following on from the meeting and their feedback. Just want to say thank you and really like some of your ideas. However, we have been designing the garden and the concept to a budget, and very clearly, although we're more than happy to add some of these details and incorporating seats and intricacies and pergolas is great, it's probably likely just to push the price up a little bit, and I didn't want that to come as a surprise when we go out to tender or get that quotation at the end of the design process. Through past experience, I know that clients tend to or can sometimes forget that they're the ones that have really requested changes or additions in the design that have caused the budget to rack up, and so by doing this I'm hopefully helping them to recognise that it's them that's increasing their budget, but it's a bit of a backup there, so that if we do get to the end of the design and find that we've gone say 20% over the budget, we can go back to that and I can sort of suggest, well look, this is what you've done, this is what you've requested, and clearly at the time I explained that was going to push prices up, but by doing this, just by sending that email, hopefully that should avoid that situation. So that's the feedback. We've taken that on board in terms of the design. We're going to implement those changes and tweaks. Next, I like to really assess the design or the concept in a little bit more detail in 3 key areas. So first, we've got practicality. Now, this is things like, so for instance, within the design, we've got the steps. What are the heights of those steps? Does that meet the site level? So are they all equal? How do they flow? We've got, for instance, within that concept that I showed you, the space between the flower bed and the kitchen, is that wide enough to comfortably wander through, to meander through and not feel like you've got to squeeze past the kitchen? The client's got a couple of young children, so the water feature, is that going to be safe? You know, do we need to put some sort of screening around it or some sort of planting maybe at least, so that they don't sort of accidentally wander in or step into that while they're playing football on the lawn? You get the idea. These are just practical key considerations of the design. And then we've got efficiency. So for example, if the patio in your design is 4 metres wide, yet the slabs are 60 centimetres, maybe we need to change that to 4.2 or 3.6. And how does this relate to other materials, say the clay pavers in the pathway? And the same goes for all features within the garden. For example, the pergola, what's it made from? If it's cedar, what size section does this come in and what lengths can we buy it at? And finally, we've got construction. So these are very similar to the practicalities, but from a constructive point of view. Where does the water go when it rains? How do the levels work in terms of the fall going towards the lawn? With the water blade, when it's on, is it going to be splashing? Is it wide enough to take the water as it flows down? Is the pump going to be able to sit in the water, and is it going to be the right size? Has it got enough water, should I say, for that to work efficiently? What about inspection chambers within the garden? Are they going to affect anything? Do they need to be raised or lowered, or are they going to cause a problem? There's recessed manhole covers, but if it starts falling partly within a flower bed, partly within the paving, that's going to potentially look a little bit out. I always put some basic levels all over my drawings as well at this stage, not to present to the client, obviously they're taken off afterwards, but just so that I can make sure that the garden flows and that there isn't anything, there's no sort of drop-offs or changes in level that I haven't thought about or really considered properly. And also with the levels, are we working to the garden in the way that it is, or are we unnecessarily changing some of the levels, some of the heights that are going to end up costing the client quite a lot more, when actually we could just put in a step up here or there to make that more efficient and mean that the landscaper doesn't have to take quite so much earth out of the garden. And all of this I do by drawing up a two-dimensional plan that I'm going to be presenting to the client. I find that by doing this, annotating a few measurements, key measurements, so for instance if we've got a patio that is 4 metres by 3 metres or what have you, so they can get a good idea of sizes and things like that. A few more annotations, highlighting bits and pieces, and then combine this with a slightly more in-depth 3D SketchUp model. Few different views maybe, that in itself gives them the practicalities that they need so they can see in a bit more depth how the garden's going to fit and work together, as well as keeping them excited and interested in the garden that they're going to be creating. So here we go, this was the result. I've noted a few sizes on there that I think are important to highlight, yet not turned it into a construction layout plan, confusing the client with too many numbers or lines. I've separated out the pergola as a separate 3D visual to be clear on how this will look, and then I've noted the changes such as the decorative corten panels on the walling to try and reduce the brickwork. So you've got the plan, the layout down, and hopefully refined to a point where there aren't going to be too many more changes. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is material choices. We're talking paving, decking, cladding, timber, gravel. The list goes on. Now there's quite a lot of materials out there, and as a designer I think we need to be refining this before we send it over to the client, at least making sure we're suggesting colours, textures, elements that are going to work within our design plan and not contrast or cause a clash with anything else within the garden. So I often make a few decisions and work out which materials that I think are going to work well or at least work best within the garden, and then drop the client a quick email with some of these options, maybe just 3 or 4 paving options, a couple of decking options, some timber, and offer my guidance on how I think that might work within the garden and how that might pair with other materials. You can see there I'm writing about some hardwood timber and how that can either go grey or whether or not we can oil it, just to give them the information they need to make that decision. So once the client's been able to choose a couple of different combinations of maybe paving and decking, I like to get them some physical samples. Looking at the website is a great way to start, but clearly physical samples give you a true representation of what that material is going to look like on site. Website photos tend to be a little bit misleading. Sometimes you can get the same product with 2 different photos looking completely different. By having the physical samples, the client can look at it outside in the garden, morning, lunchtime, evening, when it's wet, when it's dry. They can get a real sense of the product that they're going to be investing in. They also get a sense of feel, texture, how smooth is it, how rough is it. These are all really, really important and valid choices to make. And then once they've chosen these materials and we know that we've got this right, they like the way they look, the way they feel, it's time to now get this down in some sort of writing. I have a client specification that I get on to next, so that we can box off exactly what's going into their garden at this stage. Now I do this specification just for the client as part of this stage. It's not one I'd use for a tender pack or a build team. It's just too simple, doesn't have enough in the way of how you build the garden. We're going to come on to that more in the final design pack.
But no, the idea of this really is just to get on paper a list of almost of the materials we're going to be recommending and roughly how the garden's going to be put together. It's still important to put some construction information in there. Obviously, we want to manage your client's expectation, talking about things like the pergola is going to be face fixed rather than recessed, or the render's going to finish here. And if you do have a friendly landscaper, or if you're design and build, it's probably enough to get a slightly more accurate estimate on the cost of the garden, as the materials will all now be listed there.
And so we've now got an outline presentation plan or master plan ready to show the client a client specification so that we know exactly what materials are there. Yet again, this is our next presentation opportunity. So we can go and see the client, we can sit down with them, we can look at the plans together, again, looking at their body language, listening out for key elements or little bits that they might say that can allow us to make those final tweaks and really improve the garden. I tend to just read through, gloss over, but read through the specification very briefly, so I can just highlight some of the elements. Look, this is the paving you've chosen, this is the decking now, what about this? I feel again this just helps things to sink in, and we try and avoid those potential miscommunications or the client assuming something, oh, I thought this was the cladding, when actually it's just the fencing or the boundaries. And then we're going to leave this for them to yet again take some time over to digest and to see if they come back with anything else. Following it up in a week or so if we don't hear anything, just to get a sense of whether or not we're definitely there, we've got the final plans, and we can then move on to the final design pack. And there we go, tick, done. We have finished the outline master plan, we've presented it, got client specification which they're happy with. This is probably the shortest and the easiest, perhaps not the easiest, but certainly the shortest part of the design process, but it's a really valuable one. You know, what we don't want to be doing is going to the great lengths of having, going on to the next step, which is the final design pack, creating construction drawings, planting plans, lighting diagrams, etc., only to find that actually the client's misunderstood something at the concept stage, or that they suddenly come up with another change. I've learned this the hard way. And we can get everything really sort of refined down and ready for that next step. So the next stage, the final design pack, is quite a lot more in depth. That's probably the biggest part of the design process. So I'm going to split that into two different videos. We're going to go for the client aspect of the final design pack, which is sort of the bits that they're going to see and really appreciate. And then we've got the tender pack, or the contractor side of things. That's construction detailing, electrical plans, those sorts of things, and we're going to do that in two different parts. Be great to get your feedback if you're finding these videos useful, or even just a like, so I know that what I'm doing is worthwhile. Don't forget to subscribe, and look forward to talking to you all again very soon. Take care.